the versatile all-weather stablecoin for all conditions. Rain or shine, winter or summer, Frax is there. Frax will become the center of gravity for DeFi during the next bull run. Welcome to Flywheel, your favorite poetry podcast. I'm here to read my favorite poem of all time, I'm Nobody, Who Are You? By Emily Dickinson. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you'd know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog. To tell one's name, the livelong June, to an admiring bog. Emily Dickinson. I'm nobody. Who are you? In fact, I actually lived down the street from her house way back in the day when I went to UMass. And you know what? It gets fucking cold up there and you have to really soldier through. And, you know, which perfectly segues into our next guest on Flywheel. We have on Winter Soldier, who was once nobody, and now he is one of the premier researchers and up-and-coming Twitter threaders. Real threaders, not threadors, but threaders. So this is a really good one. This one is incredibly poetic. I have a lot of fun reading his latest thread, how Frax is a black hole. I really amped me up, really gave me a lot of energy. Just thinking about it is giving me energy again. And I've been filming for like an hour and a half, 2 hours just now. So like that just goes to show like how fucking excited I am for everyone to listen to this pod. Kit, what are your thoughts on this one?
I was just, talking to you guys how I've never been or rarely been reverse red pilled on Frax. So to hear it from like Winter Soldier, no less, just made me really appreciate like, damn, like, we're actually a part of something that's, has a chance to be really freaking impactful and monumental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like goes on the chain, beyond the chain, and then some. And we won't even delay it anymore. Here's Winter Soldier. But before we do that, if you want to catch all the latest reverse red pills, Frax Alpha, and DeFi insights, make sure you go hit that bell button right now. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us a like. Follow us on our socials at Flywheel DeFi on Twitter, Telegram, and TikTok. Make sure you go subscribe to our website, flywheeldefi.com, where we have daily and updates, insights about Frax and DeFi. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at DeFiDave22.
You can follow me at 0xcapital_K.
And let's get the flywheel spinning. Do you hold ETH but don't know what to do with it? Want to earn those juicy liquid staking derivative yields but don't know where to start? Well, FrxETH is there for you. FrxETH is Frax's native LSD solution, allowing you to earn boosted yields in multiple ways on your ETH. If you want to get started, go to app.frax.finance and turn your ETH into FrxETH today. Hello one, hello all. Welcome back to this episode of Flywheel DeFi. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, and I am here, as always, with capital K. And on this episode, we're going to the trenches. We're going out into the field. And we have Winter Soldier, who has made his way through his first bear market, his first cold bear market. So Winter Soldier is a research analyst at a VC fund, Hailstone, I believe. And he has been writing incredible threads for a while now. We actually met in Hong Kong at a Frax meetup we had out there. And, I've been meaning to get him on since. And then he just wrote a banger of a thread about Frax a month ago. And I'm just like, now's the time. So Winter Soldier, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me too. Happy to be here. Happy to chat about all things Frax. Let's do this, guys.
Yeah. And before we get into it, let's do a short intro into yourself and how you got into DeFi. Understand that your first foray was in NFTs, and as what happens with NFTs, they go down, and so, and then you found yourself into DeFi and writing these banger threads. So yeah, how'd you get into DeFi?
Yeah, sure. So as Dave mentioned, I got into crypto like mid 2021 through NFTs, just because most of my friends were just telling me, oh, like you buy these JPEGs, you can make some money doing it, and so that was how I got started, and then I probably got soft rugged or rugged maybe 20 to 30 times just on different collections, and then
20 to 30 times.
Like I basically bought at least like 20 to 30, because at that point I was just gonna buy what my friends told me to buy.
Was it like at like 10? You're like, I don't know if I should be listening to these people.
Yeah, I know. Because it was like a group of us, and then at that time we were basically we were just grinding on Discord to try to get into mints, and so the cost wasn't particularly. I mean, it wasn't like cheap, but it wasn't like expensive enough for me to go, oh crap, I should probably stop doing this. And then there were a few winners out of like the tens of dozens.
Oh, that's true. Good point.
Yeah,
there's always,
so that kind of gets you
the game.
Yeah, and so I basically just got really, really pissed off, and I was like, well, I got to stop losing money. And then I think around that time, it was around like when Avalanche was quite popular at the time, and I had a few friends who I traded NFTs with who were like, hey, actually, we're kind of doing this thing called yield farming, and I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Let me see what that is. And so I got into Avalanche. I think around the time like Krabata was a really big thing. I don't know if you guys know.
That's right.
So I was like, oh, we can, because you could buy NFTs, right? So that was kind of something I was familiar with. But then there was this added element of, oh, actually, if you battle and you win and you put together like two crabs that are good, you basically get a reward in exchange for doing that, right? And I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And so that was kind of what got me into looking into. Basically, the idea of being able to earn something from just playing a game was quite appealing. And then by extension, that also got me to look into things like launch pads. Oh, can I get into projects before they launch to benefit out of that? And also, if I have stable coins on Avalanche, or if I have like AVAX itself, like where can I deposit this to earn a yield? I think around that time, like YieldYak was quite popular, Platypus Finance, and then like Trader Joe. And so those are kind of like the three main ones that I used. And then from there on, it was also around that time I basically quit my old job, and then basically found my way into my current company at Hailstone. But then when I first joined, I was more a sort of project manager, because that was kind of my background. It's kind of sort of setting up teams, setting up systems, and then just by nature of that job, I had to kind of look into what other projects were doing. So that's when I started doing a lot more research, and then I just figured if I'm already doing research and kind of putting together decks and things for my own viewing pleasure, I can just share it and then see where this goes. And that's kind of how Winter Soldier became a thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And was it on Avalanche where you first heard of Frax, or was it somewhere else?
I first heard of Frax actually.
Wait, going back. Are you called Winter Soldier because you were an Avalanche during Avalanche Rush and it was like the winter?
No, I picked Winter Soldier because I started the account sort of like around the time like UST like collapse. And then I was like, it's gonna be crypto winter, and I was like, Winter Soldier.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah,
okay.
so
truly the Winter Soldier. You're like, yeah.
Yeah, because I forget. I was watching some podcast, and I forget who it was, but basically he said something along the lines of like, we just have the soldier on, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, you just have to keep going, and then so that's kind of how I picked the name. Yeah.
And then back to my question before. Where did you first hear of Frax, and in your opinion, how is it different than other stablecoins when you first saw it?
I first heard of Frax actually during Luna, so during UST.
During your perfect
lead. During UST, because I think at that time, obviously when like UST lost its peg, and then everything started collapsing. I remember I saw this. It was either some sort of like CoinDesk tweet or some sort of tweet that basically talked about, oh, by the way, like Frax lost like $1 billion in like market cap, and it didn't depeg. And I was like, that's
just
pretty
the
cool.
DeFi things, just the DeFi things.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, because
Right.
like most people were just kind of thinking to themselves like I gotta get out of Frax, right? Because like by extension, if Algo stables aren't stable, then what's going to happen to my money like on Frax? And so there was like probably some sort of bank run, and then I saw a tweet saying, oh, by the way, like we're okay, business as usual. Sucks that this happened for other people, but then business as usual for us. And so that was kind of what got me into looking at Frax. And yeah, I think if I'm being honest, I think I had, just because of UST, I had a lot of doubts regarding the
That's healthy.
like the algos. Well,
It's
actually,
good.
how does it work? But then I think because like it was intriguing enough for me to want to like look like a lot deeper into what do they actually do? How does everything actually work? And so I think the first step was just kind of understanding like how the quote unquote like algo stable peg works, and then afterwards like V2. And I think V2 is really what gave me this impression that they're doing something very, very different, and they're like the infrastructure they're building is not, they're not just kind of going, hey, we'll let the market do whatever they want and then whatever happens. They're actually very methodical in how they approach building infrastructure and also designing their protocols. And that's kind of when I started paying more attention to Frax. And then obviously after that, there was like FrxETH, and then after that, more things started happening. And so I started kind of following it quite closely. And so now here we are, probably like 4 to 5 like Frax threads later, and I'm still as optimistic and I guess bullish on Frax as before.
Yeah, and this leads perfectly into your latest thread about Frax. I'm going to pull it up here.
Before we do that, Dave, could I ask for Winter, were there other DeFi protocols that you were looking at the same time as you were looking into Frax?
Good question.
Same time, I had to look into Curve and Convex a lot too, just because
that makes sense.
Curve, Convex, and Frax just like they kind of just appear a lot.
You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and I think around that time I was looking into sort of like the Curve wars and then how bribing worked, and Frax was just always up there on like Llama Air Force with like UST, and so it was just this really big sort of I wouldn't say like it's like an echo chamber, but just all these things were correlated, and so I just had to basically make sure I knew how each protocol fit into each, sort of how the pieces fell together, and then how everything worked. So yeah.
We're zooming in for the people at home. Okay, there we go. All right, I gotta say this was very poetic. I love your artistry. I was taken on a journey, and I am pleased to take our listeners at Flywheel DeFi on a journey with Winter Soldier, with his thread, Frax Finance, nothing escapes singularity. We're going to break it down on this special episode. So as a child, I was a huge fan of space and sci-fi. Black holes in particular were the subjects of my fascination. Galactic forces of nature feasting on every star and planet they touch. Nothing escapes, not even light. I soon learned black holes were much more than what I initially thought. They are, surprisingly, the brightest objects in space. As matter spirals into the singularity, friction is so strong it creates electromagnetic radiation up to 4 trillion times brighter than our sun. Jets of matter are expelled at light speed in the ensuing chaos, reaching up to thousands of light years away to become raw materials for new galaxies. Pretty cool stuff. Frax Finance evokes the same sense of awe, the familiar feeling of this is so cool that compelled me to research as much as I could. This protocol is a force of nature, an unstoppable singularity expanding its event horizon with innovative products and astute microeconomics. And much like black holes, Frax's true purpose and potential are often overshadowed by first impressions. Yielding 5% on ETH LSDs Inventing AMOs and integrating RWAs are cool and bullish feats, but you miss the bigger picture if you just focus on those. Frax is the only DeFi entity that can programmatically create monetary premium for its stablecoins. Once you understand how they do it, I'm 100% convinced you'll be as bullish as I am. I'm going to stop there with that last tweet of Frax is the only DeFi entity that can programmatically create monetary premium for its stablecoins. What do you mean by that? Can we just dive in deeper there?
Yeah, sure. I think just at a very high level, because I do think the tweet kind of goes into how that functions, but at a very high level, most stablecoin protocols, when they launch, when they sort of move into DeFi, or when they launch, or if they're DeFi native, they have a really hard time gaining traction because as my good friend DeFi Cheetah has mentioned it in multiple threads, cost of liquidity is quite high in general. Like
cost of capital, yeah.
Most stablecoins are either renting liquidity from their users by paying them with emissions, or doing the same like with bribes, and it's quite difficult for any new stablecoin or any stablecoin without a sort of a novel mechanism to gain any traction. And I think Frax has a few things going for them. I think the biggest sort of advantage that they have is, I think, just by nature of being really early and just being in the market for a while, they've built themselves a very, very, they've solidified a few very, very good advantages for themselves, both in terms of, having a lot of control over I wouldn't say over the market itself specifically, but just having a lot of leverage to pull in order to quote unquote incubate whatever stablecoin they choose to launch next. And I think and they can do it in a way that's quite precise and quite, I wouldn't use the word deterministic, just because it does seem like if they do all these things, the outcome is the stablecoin gains traction, and people start providing liquidity. I think FrxETH is a really, really good example of it. Just convex curve pools, dual token model, and then you basically just see it start going up. And so, so I think like at a high level, that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, first to market, first to jump on certain products and trends, skating to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. And now we jump into the table of contents, and we get the singularity, stablecoin maximalism. At the center of every black hole is the singularity, a core belief, if you will. For Frax, that belief is stablecoin maximalism, which states the following: all DeFi primitives converge on being stablecoins, and every stablecoin converges on the same universal structure. The structure, as defined by Sam, comprises of risk-free yield, which is the revenue generated by the assets backing the stablecoin, at peg using the lowest risk available, and the swap facility where it can be redeemed like a liquidity pool. And when I think of stablecoin maximalism, I immediately think of like Plato's realms of form. Like in the realm of forms, there is the ideal stablecoin, that's where it exists, and the shadow that is casted on chain is stablecoin maximalism. Can we go in your own words, like how would you explain stablecoin maximalism? And you had further things you wanted to add here.
So I think stablecoin maximalism is, I think as a belief, it's just that most DeFi assets in the future will basically have follow some sort of structure where it functionally like resembles a stablecoin. And I give a few examples about what that would look like. Right?
Do you believe in it? Do you believe in stablecoin maximalism?
I see it happening. I wouldn't say I'm like 100% convinced, but I do see protocols, or a lot of protocols, in one way or another adopting quote unquote stable coins, which is basically, I think a better way to understand stablecoins is like basically pegged assets. Because I think when you think stablecoin, you think, oh, USD pegged stablecoin, right? But in actuality, I think that is a broader sort of generalized term for pegged assets, and which can include which can include stuff like like SUSD, for example, or like GLP from GMX. I think those things also fall into the same bracket. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And then we, going through, we have stability, composability. For the sake of visuals, I'm just going to keep it as is. We can observe the convergence of various protocols. You just explained that. Here we go. The monetary premium part, which was a core part of your, statement earlier. As such, Frax has a monetary premium down to an art. And with Finres, it is now has all components for a liquidity engine, a deterministic machine that sustains all four pillars of the structure defined in Stablecoin Maximalism to drive adoption for Frax stablecoins. And you get into liquidity machine more in your thread. So what is the liquidity machine that, Frax has hold of?
Yeah, sure. I think there's four main things. So Finres is like the last piece. It's kind of like Thanos and the Infinity Stones. Like there's Finres. That's kind of like a good way to conceptualize it. So there's Finres. There's kind of like convex / curve gauge weight, and then there's also protocol owned liquidity. Mm-hmm. And and then there's AMOs, but the AMOs are, I consider them more as sort of like facilitative, but then they're still quite an important part of how Frax manages its operations on chain. So these are the four sort of core pillars, if you will, that Frax uses. And it seems like, or at least to me, the way that Frax is able to basically create demand for their stablecoins is they basically follow this formula, if you will, where they basically set these things up. And I think initially it was just gauge weight, POL, and like AMOs. But then now with Finres, I think Finres is more specifically for the Frax stablecoin itself, just because I think it has most implications there. But I do think that as a whole, whether it's like FPI, whether it's like FrxETH and the Frax stablecoin itself, they in general follow the structure of using gauge weight to sort of jumpstart everything, acquiring POL in the process, and then using AMOs to manage the process. And so, which is why I use the word engine. Yeah.
And then we go into number 2, the Spark, the CVX gauge weight. Frax, they've been accumulating CVX since July of 2021, less than 2 months after Convex launched. A treasury deployment to farm CVX progressed into a partnership with CVX FXS before eventually snowballing into one of Frax's biggest competitive advantages. Was it? I thought it was earlier than July of 2021, but I could be mistaken. Was it July 2021?
Yeah. So I got this date off of the announcement from Frax. So I think behind the scenes, I'm assuming that Sam probably spoke to like C2TP about, hey, this seems pretty interested. We'd like to somehow be involved in this.
And so, what are your thoughts on Frax was the second protocol to be, accepted on the Convex platform. What are your thoughts on the pros and the potential kind of trade-offs of it? Because it was a liquidity engine, but in a sense, but also for governance maxis, they're giving up governance power for economic power, which the people wanted. But what are your thoughts about the positives and trade-offs with it?
I think at that point in time, when Frax did reach out to Convex, I think at that point in time, governance was less important than just making sure that the protocol has a prosperous future. I think you kind of have to, as the dev team and the project team, you have to kind of weigh what's more important at this point in time and what yields the best results. Governance doesn't really matter if your stablecoin only has 10 million TVL. The magnitude of what you can do, and I would even argue that the amount of people who are willing to actually participate in governance suddenly drastically drops off. If you look at something like Maker, right? Maker is just really big because, by the way, they have most of the TVL on ETH, and because of that, people are naturally drawn to that kind of, I would use the word influence, but just that kind of success, and as a result of that, you have people who care about Maker itself, and they're willing to actually be active participants in the ecosystem, run the sub DAOs. And so I think I personally think that back in 2021, like Frax made this conscious decision that we actually need to make sure that our stablecoin is as resilient as possible, and it can actually like last for a very, very long time. And I do think that partnering with Convex just was like a no-brainer. I'm actually quite surprised, or at least I'd like to think that like the Frax team was able to conceptualize like, oh, there's going to be some sort of war over curve tokens in the future, and that's why they did it. But it does seem like they had some sort of inkling of what that would look like, and so that's why they kind of partnered with Convex, like probably within 2 months or even before they actually fully launched.
Yeah, it makes sense. Also, with the amount of CVX that Frax, the treasury, holds, it's kind of like, oh, you have some of ours, and we have some of yours, and so there's checks and balances there. Next up, we got DeFi liquidity is expensive, as we mentioned before. Protocols compete for liquidity either by incentivizing LPs with inflationary emissions and bribes, or buying and voting and locking CRV. As Kit says, with CRV, the tokenomics are the products. Both options incur heavy losses for the protocol, who competes against each other in a race to the bottom. With CVX, the cost of liquidity for Frax is practically zero. Using VLCVX's influence on curve gauges, Frax can bootstrap deep liquidity for any pool, using mostly CRV emissions to subsidize the liquidity costs, allowing the protocol to retain most of the value it generates. Wait, does it still use CRV emissions? Well, doesn't it turn the CRV into CVX CRV? And wasn't like something was done, like there was a different agreement. There was something that happened like several months ago where Frax got a whitelist of CRV, and then yeah.
I think here what I meant was just in terms of creating like a swap facility with some sort of yield opportunity. They can basically vote the pool into existence, as opposed to having to like, I'm going to hurl like a bunch of Frax FXS at it every single week to make sure people.
I see what you're saying. That you're directing the CRV emissions, not like what they do. Okay, I see. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah. So, the tokenomics are the product, guys. Remember that. Emissions and bribes attract LPs, increasing demand by way of minting, swapping, and borrowing, all of which occur, freeze, in TBL for Frax. All of these economic forces come together to create the first half of the liquidity flywheel. Take a shot for its stablecoins. And now we go on to number 3, the catalyst. POL, protocol and liquidity. When the price of FXS exploded in 2021, Frax collateral requirements were lowered, which enabled Frax to deploy its surplus collateral to acquire POL. POL provides control over the supply and cost of borrowing of Frax stables. Instead of relying on arbitrage or hard protocol shutdowns, AMOs plus POL stabilize PEG with unrivaled precision and intent. Want proof? Frax absorbed more than $1 billion of sell pressure during the USD meltdown. I'm going to stop right there. Winter Soldier, what's your definition of AMOs, and how would you explain AMOs to someone that, explain to me like I'm 5, like someone who's like brand new?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the ELA 5 of AMOs is, I think you can think of it as basically a set of, I would say, like very, very smart and intelligent computer programs that make sure the value of something is as close to 1 as possible, and it has the ability to buy and sell specific currencies to make sure that the currency's value remains as close to 1 as possible. I think that's like in a nutshell what they do conceptually. There's obviously different AMOs within Frax itself, but I think the sort of the core of it it's basically there to make sure that the peg is as close to 1 as possible.
Yeah, these little robots are at work making sure Frax is pegged, or FrxETH is pegged, or any of like Frax stablecoins remain pegged, and any like excess profit goes to like protocol and VEFXS holders. Continue on with the thread. Most importantly, by deploying POL, Frax is eligible for swap fees and emissions from its pools to recollateralize Frax. Buy back FXS to fully offset costs of liquidity. Nice. Recycle into VL CVX and VECRV gauges and restart the cycle, restart the flywheel with more gauge weight in POL. And that's not all. Wait, there's more. Wait, there's shout out. Sorry, Billy Mays. I didn't mean to fuck that up. But wait, there's more. Tokens paired with Frax base pool, FraxBP, inherit this flywheel, FraxBP, a composable LP tokens of the Frax USDC curve pool that can be paired with other assets. At its peak, FraxBP POL supported nearly $856 million of liquidity across 36 pairs on curve. So I'm going to stop there. Can you explain like FraxBP and its significance and why it matters to the viewers at home?
Sure, yeah. So FraxBP is, I think you can think of it as a sort of very composable, what's a good analogy for this? It's like I would think of it as like if you want to make like a rice dish, like you have to have rice. Like it's like something with rice, something with rice, and then like FraxBP is kind of like rice in that situation. So if you are a protocol that wants to have liquidity on curve, you can either try to bribe it into existence, which is quite expensive. You can try to buy CRB and vote lock it, and they can vote your pool into existence, which is quite difficult. Or you can basically reach out to Frax and say, hey, we'd like to use FraxBP as a pairing asset for a coin. And what that does is you basically, in the process of doing that, you inherit a lot of the advantages that Frax itself has over its own liquidity pools. And so it's almost like I would think of it as like an incubation program almost, where you just, hey, I have this stable coin, I want to have liquidity, I need liquidity, what can I do? You reach out to Frax, you basically get a pretty sweet deal, in my opinion, right? You have an AMO managed pool, you have basically really, really efficient bribes that we'll get into in a second as well. And so I think it's just a very, very good, sort of like strategic move that most protocols have access to, especially if they're trying to build liquidity on the curve itself. And Frax is just constantly there, with open arms, welcoming protocols to partner with them. Yeah.
The positive sum mentality of Frax. Everybody wins. We all rise together. We've loved to see it. We've been loved seeing it since FraxBP launched, and even before that, even before FraxBP launched, Frax was preaching a positive sum mentality. Continuing moving on with the thread. Yeah, partner protocols are entitled to pool revenue proportional to their demand they generate for FraxBP. As demand rises, AMOs mint new Frax into pools, earning fees and emissions that are recycled by Frax into the flywheel. Another shot. Protocol gauge bribes are recycled the same way. The effectiveness of the FraxBP flywheel is best expressed in a blog post by 0x Crypto Harry from Inverse Finance, the beneficiary of the dollar FraxBP pool that peaked at $61 million. So what exactly happened here?
I think he basically describes like sort of the effectiveness of bribing after partnering with Frax, and which basically states that in a nutshell, basically for every $1 of bribes they put in, they get something like $2 to $3 worth of incentives out of it. And this happens because once they bribe the pool, Frax has a certain portion of the pool, right? And so what Frax actually does is that they recycle the bribes that they receive back into the pool and the gauges itself. And from that, you gain and from that, Frax receives a smaller portion. They basically repeat this loop until it kind of goes to like, not like zero, but then to like a really, really small number. And so from a protocol's perspective, instead of having to, you're basically paying like $1 for like $3 worth of incentives, which is just very, very efficient. And to your point about being positive sum, I think without this, most protocols would just be basically slowly bleeding themselves to death, right, with just emissions and bribes. But then with this, it seems like there is a more effective way and efficient way for them to acquire liquidity and actually gain some traction. And so, it's just a very, very good, it's a very, very sweet deal for most stablecoins. Yeah.
And one more thing to note also is as the FraxBP portion increases, like as in the TVL of the pool increases, Frax would bribe more into that pool pro rata. So it actually increases as it gets more and more liquidity, gets more and more incentives, and again, flywheel.
Yeah. FraxBP aligns incentives perfectly between the partner and Frax. Demand for the stable equals demand in Frax. In exchange, the partner gains an AMO managed swap facility, a stable peg, and a capital efficient flywheel for sustainable liquidity. It's the whole liquidity engine, folks. Winter Soldier, I have one more question for you before we go on to the missing link. What would DeFi look like if Frax just didn't exist and was removed from the picture? If there was no FraxBP, if there was no flywheel, like how would DeFi look different without Frax?
That's a very very interesting question. Let me think. What would DeFi look like without?
Because there's no flywheel. Like would I didn't even know. I don't know if like stables that are starting off would be able to sustain themselves. I feel like Tether and USDC and Maker would probably take way more of the pool.
Yeah, I think without Frax, I would imagine that most, and I'm just speaking in the context of like a stable swap like Curve, right? I would imagine that the stable swap itself somehow has to subsidize liquidity for the larger pairs like USDC, maybe DAI itself because Tether, Circle, and Maker, they don't do bribes at all. They just exist. And
they just exist.
They just exist.
The ultimate monetary premium just existing, folks.
They did exist. Yeah. And I would go out on a limb and say that it is entirely possible that stablecoins that want to have liquidity on a specific stable swap have to kind of help that stable swap sort of incentivize liquidity for USDT, USDC, and DAI in some strange way. Like in addition to paying for your own liquidity pool, you have to make sure that there's like a counterparty asset that's like that there's a lot of that counterparty asset, and that and that the stable swap itself actually doesn't basically cease to exist in like 2 to 3 months because of because of not having the liquidity. And so I would imagine that there would probably be some sort of like, it's like a race to the bottom, just basically protocols fundraising and then shelving out cash through the tokens and just going, hey, like we need to survive, and it's not a very pleasant experience, and it's not very conducive to growth either.
Yeah, I mean, look at other stable swaps. Like remember Swerve Kit? The curve. Swerve.
Did they turn into Saddle? Or
no, they didn't turn into Saddle. But Swerve was like a fork of Curve, and they're like, we're Swerve. And they didn't last too long. They just gave out a fuck ton of incentives, you need to have I feel like you just need to have a first follower that's going to play the game, and Frax was that first follower for Curve. And Convex was the meta governance layer for Curve and eventually Frax, and created this triumphant of sorts, this DeFi on-chain triumphant of sorts that kept the flywheel going even through the bear market. And yeah, Saddle Finance was also a stable swap that closed down recently as well. And I
guess to kind of add another point, I think Frax makes it easier for different stablecoin protocols to actually have a fighting chance or survive against as late joiners because Curve's tokenomics are quite punitive for latecomers, especially if you're a stablecoin that's launching now. You're very, very far behind compared to stablecoins that have been on Curve for a very long time, and it creates a system where new entrants have to you're either
explain why.
Sorry?
Explain why, please.
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to understand it is if you are a stablecoin that has been on Curve for a very long time, the chances of you having a lot of Curve on hand is quite high, just by nature of being there and by nature of receiving emissions. And so because of that, you have a lot of sway over sort of curve emissions every month, right? And when you allocate emissions, most protocols tend to allocate emissions to themselves, and so it creates this very sort of like dog eat dog sort of system where if you're early and you're kind of the big bad, you get most of the market share. And so it's very difficult for newer stablecoins who are most likely under-resourced, who aren't as well connected as like sort of these bigger, more established incumbents. It's really hard for them to gain any sort of foothold in the process. And so I think FraxBP makes it a lot easier. Like instead of having to kind of figure it out for yourself, you approach Frax and you're kind of you join this sort of really strong ecosystem of with really sort of potent, I would say like flywheels. Basically, you like instead of having to figure everything out for yourself, you basically it's almost like you go through this like incubation program of like, hey, by the way, just do these things. We'll help you sort everything out. And Frax has also been able to structure FraxBP in a way that makes it very, very positive sum for everyone who's involved. Like Frax itself gets incentives out of it, and so does the stablecoin. And I think without Frax, I like to think that some other protocol would come up with this, but it's quite difficult to imagine. There's a lot of pieces that have to be in place, and you really have to play it exactly the way Frax did in order for it to happen.
Everything had to align.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a question. I had this on for after the thread, but I'm just going to ask it now. What do you think of the VE model that Curve, pioneered and now is like used throughout DeFi, whether it's with Frax, whether it's our finance, others as well? Do you feel the same? We know how DeFi Cheater feels. He loves it. Do you feel the same way? And how do you think other dexes like Aura and whatnot? Well, Aura's like on top of Balancer, but other VE models on other protocols like stack up against Curve's model?
I think for what Curve is trying to do, like just as sort of a liquidity hub, I think the VE model just makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of other protocols just kind of adopt VE just because they want some sort of way to reduce sell pressure on their token. But I don't think, I'm sure that was part of the reason why Curve adopted this model, but I wouldn't say that that's kind of a really big reason why they did it, I would say. Because in order for the VE model to work, you have to have people or protocols that really want to have and hold your token, basically. I think a really, really important aspect of a VE model is that protocols that your token is highly sought after because it's like a very scarce resource, and VE sort of increases the scarcity of that resource, and also at the same time makes it so that the protocols who are after this resource really need it, and it's quite crucial to their survival. So you kind of create this it's like if you have firewood in Alaska, if you sell firewood in Alaska, and then in some strange way you're able to make it so that I wouldn't say you have the control over the supply of firewood per se, but then you make it so that whoever gets it can only get it from you because you're the quote unquote the only provider of it. I know this sounds
a bit. You're the firewood plug in Alaska.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And so I think the VE model works because people who need it, protocols that need it quite well, and they're willing to pay for it. And there is actual competition for that resource instead of a random protocol just plugging VE in hopes of kind of stopping sell pressure. That doesn't work because there's no demand for your token as of in any way, shape, or form, and so it just doesn't really work.
Yeah, there's a reason for your token existing. The tokenomics is the product.
Let me ask you a quick question to Winter. Do you think another project to come out with similar tokenomics as Curve of 300 years emission and VE model, do you think that tokenomics will still fly today?
Would it wheel? Would it wheel?
Would it wheel? I don't think so. Yeah.
I agree.
I don't think
I
so.
agree. Yeah, I think this like only could have happened like at the moment in time that Curve launched it, and for their specific product, and like the way that it was executed was just so brilliant that it, it made it like almost like over like 3 years, like pretty much a cycle. And now like we're on the cusp of like something new, excitement again, ETH above 2K, ETF buzz, all this fun stuff is coming. And like Curve is about to come out with not just dollar stablecoins, but ETHPEG stablecoins and LSDs and real yield on chain. It's really an exciting time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But before getting to LSDs, we gotta go to the missing link, number 4, Finres PBC. Finres PBC is the final piece of Frax's liquidity engine, the key to $1 trillion stablecoin. In Frax's stablecoin maximalist-centric view, it is impossible for any on-chain stable to scale up to 4, market cap without ties to fiat. Finres functions as the RWA conduit for the Frax ecosystem, providing access to T-bills, reverse repos, and USD deposits, earning the overnight rate, completing the risk-free yield pillar for Frax with yield from the Fed. I'm going to stop there. In your own words, like how would you describe Frax's RWA setup?
I think it's very smart. You basically kind of avoid all of the potential legal implications by setting up sort of a public benefit corporation. I think I can't like I'm not too familiar with like the US legal system. I can't wholeheartedly say that they're completely out of trouble, but it does seem that it's a very, very active and conscious step to just avoid as much legal issues as possible, and also do it in a way that's as cost effective as possible, just because of how PBCs are structured.
Mm-hmm. The public benefit corporation for the public benefit, folks. Moving on with the thread with Finres, Frax has constructed an on-chain yield curve that uses the IORB rate to determine optimal allocation of assets to generate yield. My good friend DeFi Cheetah, shout out DeFi Cheetah, anticipates an influx of on-chain and institutional capital for Frax as a result. DeFi Cheetah is such a big Frax bull. I love it. Shout out DeFi Cheetah. He's this big Curve ecosystem bull, like friend of the show. Can you just define to the viewers and listeners at home what the IORB rate is and what Frax is doing with it?
Sure. Let me kind of think of like a. Should I try the ELI5 or should I? Okay, yeah. So the IORB stands for I believe it stands for the interest rate on like reserve balances, and it basically
it's the overnight rate. Yep.
The overnight rate, yeah, and I think you can think of it as you can think of it as like the interest that the Fed pays depositors who provide liquidity to the Fed. I think in my mind the best way to explain it. And what that basically means is that the interest rate that the Fed pays for deposits is also synonymous with kind of like what the risk-free yield should be in a way, because it's like something you can get so it's something that's quite immediate, and it's something that's kind of universal across the board as well. And basically what Frax does here with the IORB rate is it uses that as like a benchmark to determine the optimal allocation of its assets across sort of repos, across like treasuries, across sort of overnight USD deposits, earning that rate. And they use that as a benchmark to determine how to allocate those assets, so that Frax users basically are able to enjoy sort of like the highest possible yields on chain in a way. Yeah. So that's kind of like the in my mind like the easiest way to explain it. Yeah.
Got it. Now we have, once Frax is fully collateralized by RWAs, I also wouldn't be surprised to see Frax phase out Frax USDC BP for a pure FraxBP and scale it with the same liquidity flywheel. POL would instead be strictly used to facilitate the Frax RWA on-off ramping. And you see this developing, not with like a FrxUSD yet, although that has been talked about, but with alternatives to Frax USDC, you have Frax USDP, you have Frax PYUSD in the works. You have like other things like happening. So what are your thoughts on that, on like alternatives to Frax USDC BP?
Yeah, I do think that sort of tying it to like PayPal USD and Paxos is just another sort of way to gain access to RWAs, because with PayPal USD and with Paxos, you're able to redeem those for like actual United States dollars, which can then be used to basically help Frax either acquire or like to basically acquire more RWAs, right? And so I'm not sure if Frax will use those assets, like will give like USDP and like PYUSD the same treatment as USD as like the Frax, as the current FraxBP. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because it just gives a lot more confidence. It's kind of like the same sort of model that they've been using in the past, just I guess more diversified across different stablecoins. And I remember reading somewhere in the Frax Telegram chat that there is some sort of deal that's talked about between Frax and PayPal, like in exchange for giving us liquidity on chain. There's some sort of incentive structure and sort of incentive program there. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that Frax actually looks into, just because it's another way for them to gain more traction and to like, I guess, like increase their like POL, so to speak, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, makes sense. And now moving on to everything everywhere. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I mean, this is exactly what I want to talk about. It's like when everything everywhere all at once, and when it's at 100% collateralization, Frax will join the ranks of USDT and USDC as the reserve stablecoins backed by RWAs. This one really got me going. Like, whoa! Like I never, even though I'm such a Fraximalist and a bull, I never once considered like Frax on equal terms with, a Circle or a Tether or kind of anything like that. So kind of when I read it here, I was like, yeah, no shit. Obviously, they're going to be backed by the same thing. So why not? And on top of that, Frax has all of the DeFi like legs and arms that Circle and Tether does not. So it was super exciting, and I love the graphic there, of course.
Yeah. Okay, do the next few tweets.
Sure. And then, so Frax will also become a hedge against volatility. AMOs and POL not only maintain stability autonomously and transparently in real time, but also accrue value for the ecosystem and its partners with Flywheel economics. Take a shot. We will hold Frax in our wallet like USDC and USDT.
Boom.
Like, dude, this made me just get so. I was like, I thought I was bullish. I was like, now that is like speaking way more.
Dude, I'm literally Fraxpo, and I could not have been more bullish. I was just like, let's fucking go.
Yeah, I never once considered us even I thought we would always be that special stablecoin reserved for, DeFi related things. But obviously here, the way you laid it out, I was like, obviously, once we have RWA, I mean, we do have RWAs. And when everything is kind of changed over into having those backings, holy shit.
Yeah.
Right?
We will be thought of as safe as, and redeemable as in the same league as USDC and USDT. But I'll also add, we'll be more in our own lane, carving our own lane, because of how the rewards of the whole ecosystem and the whole flywheel are distributed. Instead of just some private corporation and somewhere out in the world, it's distributed to VE FXS holders in this future.
Yeah. I'd like to kind of like make a point that I think it's infinitely harder for a sort of fiat-backed stablecoin to break into DeFi than it is for the other way around.
I'll go into that.
Obviously, yeah. Obviously, I don't think quote unquote breaking into DeFi is like in the purview of like Circle or Tether, just because they're really, really established. And I do think they gained sort of their popularity and status just because at that point in time there was nothing else to kind of help users hedge against volatility on chain, and so everyone just kind of resorts to using USDT and USDC. And a really big reason you do that is because you know deep down that, well, at least with Circle, you know deep down that, oh, if I can redeem this for like actual US dollars, right? And that does give the retail investor a lot of confidence. And there's a reason why people prefer holding USDC and USD to other stable coins. But I do think that it would be a lot harder for them if they were to start now to try to break into DeFi. They have a lot going for them just because of their sort of their brand. But I do think it's infinitely a lot more difficult for them. They would have to invest a lot of resources and a lot of time into actually building all this infrastructure out, as opposed to Frax that's kind of done it the other way around, where we start at DeFi and we gradually build ourselves a bridge to fiat. And I think that is like or at least now looking back, seems like a better strategy than just kind of doing it the other way around.
Yeah, I've noticed kind of like in your worldview, this bridge to fiat is like a very key part of it. And in your previous interview with the Crypto Moose, shout out Crypto Moose, that was very helpful for doing research for this pod. You had a very interesting, this is like a real hot take right here, and I want to get into it. You think that CBDCs will be the Trojan horse for acceptance. Why do you think that is?
Okay, yeah, I think the example I gave is that I think there's a few things. I would say the first thing is most people who use fintech don't really care / pay attention to how it actually works on the back end. And I think you see this with like credit cards, with like Apple Pay, like it just works. People just slap it on and it works. And
slap and go.
Yeah, slap and go, right? Like tap and go, like slap and go. And the reason that is a thing is because without being able to articulate sort of like the trust assumptions and all that stuff, they just know that, oh, someone's like watching over me when I use this.
It works. Yeah,
it works. And if something goes wrong, there are proper pathways I can take in order to kind of get what I'm owed, so to speak. And I think that right now, one of the biggest sort of issues with crypto is that it just seems like there's no accountability. And it does require the user to pay a lot of attention and put a lot of time and effort into protecting themselves and making sure that they don't get scammed. They can actually, get money back when something bad happens. And that's just not very conducive to adoption. Like the analogy I would use is like, if my 60-year-old auntie is like willing to like use and transact with crypto, then we're actually there. And I do think that like the Trojan horse of that is like, if she kind of realizes, oh, actually our national currency is like on a blockchain and it's actually something that the government is like watching over, that makes them more receptive to the idea, because most people don't really, and like I guess the third problem is that most people don't really read past the headlines. And so recently in Hong Kong, there was another exchange. Like Hong Kong had their own like sort of mini FTX incident where basically
I remember this. Yeah,
JPEX basically ran off with like $1.2 billion worth of like customer fund, USD. And I probably got like at least three phone calls from relatives asking me, is everything okay? Like, are you okay? Like, are you going to get arrested? Do you work in JPEX? Which is like, and unfortunately, because of it, right? The impression that crypto gives off is, oh, it's scammy, right? And it's quite dogmatic in a way. But most people don't stop to think that, oh, actually, the same kind of scam could have happened with gold, with a multi-level marketing pyramid scheme, or I don't know, Nigerian princess sending you emails like and asking you to pay them money, right? Like the same type of scam could have happened with different assets. It's just this time it's crypto, and because there's no regulation, basically a bunch of people got burned really hard, and so it's almost like you have to make it so easily acceptable for the retail user that they can just use it without having to care about any of the repercussions of it. I think that's where you actually get to like sort of mass adoption. And the analogy I would use again is it's a credit card. Nobody knows how it works. Notice I can maybe count on my hand like 2 people who actually told me, oh, when I swipe my card, this is what happens through the POS system. It goes to Visa. Visa does this thing, and then money's deducted from my bank. Like no one knows how that works. They just know, oh, if I get a card from a bank and I swipe it, it works. I have to pay for it every month, and that's kind of the extent that I think most people would want to operate on, especially when it comes to like stuff like crypto. So so that's kind of why I hold this view of like, oh, like, I think CBDCs just give people that impression of, oh, it's safe, we're good, just use it, and then that by extension may get them to start looking into like DeFi itself, because oh, by the way, this is something that the government uses. So yeah.
So I think to add into that, there was this I forgot what was the document, but I remember they specifically mentioned Curve. This was like one of the central banks releasing a paper, and they
was it Bank of International Settlements?
Yes.
Yeah, I was reading that too.
Like the merit, something, it starts with an M, I believe.
How stable are your stable coins? Or like how something like that.
Exactly. And then like the fact that Curve Finance got like a shout out in this like Fed paper or a reserve paper, I was like, holy shit. Even if the end user doesn't end up going into Curve, but the fact that central banks or like institutions of these nations are using Curve, like that alone is enough.
I believe right? Like one of them had like a model, like the Curve model, right?
Yeah. So regardless, my point being is that we don't even need retail to use it, as long as like the institutions use Curve to settle out like their accountings, right? Because right now with the way banks do it, it's like, hey, I send you 90, you send me 100. Technically, let's net out at 10, so I will send you the 10 net. But that takes a while for them to net out the books. But on Curve, it's instant settlement and technically pennies on what they would normally pay for transaction fees, like off chain. So instant settlements, cheaper fees, and 24/7.
Yeah,
just institutions can use less. Yeah.
And then to kind of add on to that too, like I think being in crypto, you're kind of told or conditioned into questioning everything just because it's in your best interest to not get wrecked, right? Like, and I speak from like having ample experience from like being robbed from NFTs. You just have to know what you're doing and like read into it. That's just not the model that most people operate on, in my opinion. Most people are quite happy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this. It's just kind of a difference in like mentality, and to each their own, right? Some people, like my dad still writes checks, even though like here in Hong Kong, you can just do it with your bank account on your phone. But he's just like, I don't know how to use my phone, so I'm just gonna write people the check, and he'll still like grab it, walk to the bank, sit down and say, hey, can you cash this for me? But then he can just do it on his phone, take a photo of it, and then they'll do everything for him. But he just refuses to do it just because he's so kind of used to doing that already. And when he does those things without being able to articulate why he believes that those things work, he just knows it works. And he fundamentally believes that, oh, I'm protected when I do this. And until crypto, whether it's through institutions, whether it's through governments, achieve that same effect where users can use it without having to worry too much, I think there's still going to be at least a few more years until we actually reach like true mass adoption where everyone has a blockchain model on their SIM card or something. I think that will still take a few more years.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts on CBDCs. I understand what you're saying, and when it comes to trust and everything, but I'm not sure how I feel about the central bank of a country issuing the currency directly to the users and the people. I think in certain jurisdictions and maybe like city states like Hong Kong or like Singapore or smaller countries, it makes sense, especially countries that may like where it's like much more of an enclosed system. But I think I'm talking about more specifically for the US, like where it has this like kind of this deep dollar structure with with the Fed. You have like the Fed with like the larger banks, with like the regional Fed banks that, you know, issue it to like the member banks that, you know, issue it to, you know, goes down lines to the people. When you have like a CBDC, it goes directly to the people. It's like sets the interest rate. And like I mean, it goes directly to people, and like we can like talk all day about like certain like, you know, surveillance, privacy, like concerns about like, oh, they can just like shut down the like, oh, like we don't like what you're doing, like we can just like blacklist your shit. What I like about the stablecoin model over CBDCs that, you know, outside of like privacy and like surveillance and whatnot, it gives like, it makes the dollar competitive. Like you can choose which stablecoin you want. Like, do I want Tether? Do I want USDC? Do I want Frax? Do I want DAI? And I think that's like really powerful in terms of like building a better stablecoin rather than just like monopolizing with like a CBDC. And I'm not sure if like the Fed is capable of creating a CBDC, to be honest. I feel like they're researching, but like until I see it, like I don't believe it. I think like I said, like Hong Kong, you know, it's like doing experimentation there. Makes sense. I'm like, wouldn't be surprised if they're going to release something like within like a year, like 2 years, in like other jurisdictions, Switzerland, you know, where else, like Bahamas, like all these other Brazil especially. There, but like in the US, I don't see CBDC happening. I see stablecoin regulation kind of like happening, and like banks in the future issuing their version of stablecoins on chain. There's no better buyer of US debt than stablecoins. So that's my thought.
No, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I have a friend who works at like the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and I'm not sure if you guys know, but in Hong Kong, the MA itself doesn't actually handle sort of the issuance of currencies. It's like
it's the banks. It's the banks, right?
Like so, there's three main banks in Hong Kong that do it, and he actually told me that in the process of kind of speaking to other sovereign sovereign banks, they were actually discussing, you know, what model would be the best for making a central bank digital currency. And Hong Kong was like, oh, we want to try this model where the MA controls everything. But then it seems like to all the other countries, they actually want to explore having the banks do it.
It's like even in like Hong Kong's model, there's not even like there's not even a proto CBDC. It's literally like three, like you said, like three banks. They're basically like three stablecoins issuing the Hong Kong dollar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I do think, like, to your point, it does make the US dollar more competitive in a way. And I also think some things that most governments are concerned with is like sort of how fast can they make this happen, and having to hire a team, structure a team, test a product, build an MVP, that takes a lot of time, as opposed to just working with large providers of like this type of service, like Circle, for example, right?
Yeah.
Of this, and Circle like has existing infrastructure to make their stablecoin like basically omni-chain, like right there they have CCTP in place, and so I think it makes a lot more sense for the US government to work with a few providers to make it happen, and just work on the regulation part and the part where they, you know, have really stringent controls and they make sure that the US dollar is still competitive. I think that as sort of the way forward makes a lot more sense than just going, hey, everyone shut down, you're doing this our way now. That's just very, very slow. And I don't think for something like for a country like the US, it might work in Hong Kong, like you said. Maybe
it makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe even in China, but then I think that's like a toss-up. You know?
So I actually think that they will offer this not because of all the current infrastructure and the benefit of everybody else. I think it's to the government's own benefit, because if they were to do a CBDC and they fuck up, they can't roll it back. You know, whereas they let all these private people issue their own kind of like US dollar stablecoin, and then the government can then have like almost kingmaker power, which is what they really care about, is the ability to kingmake someone and then have that person become the incumbent that they obviously control, right? This person took on all the risk. If they fucked up, then they, you know, go BK and like the market kind of heals itself. So that I think it's a really great way for the government to have a bunch of bets on like whichever stablecoin rises to the top, and then whoever makes it to the top, they're like, okay, now you're the king, but then you have to listen to me.
It's like the Simpsons meme of like them betting money and like the crabs or something fighting. It's like
yeah. No, yeah. I think Ken makes a very good point there. It's just like private sector innovation is just a lot faster and a lot more, like, I guess it's just better than like public sector innovation in general. And so just waiting for an incumbent to come out and say, hey, I think we're the best at doing this. Like, you can work with us directly. I think the same goes for like U.S. defense contracts as well. They don't really pick, like they don't do it themselves. It's like Lockheed Martin and like Raytheon, right?
Right.
So,
Palantir and what?
Yeah,
and all those. But yeah, and go like look at all the innovation that's happening on chain at the speed of block by block, at the speed of light, at the speed of bits. Look at all the innovation we've had since DeFi summer over the past 3 years, and getting into finally the end game of it all. That was a great discussion, guys. I really this podcast is like giving me energy. We're an hour into it, and I am like fully amped up. It's literally 10:15 where I am, and I am wide awake. So thank you, Winter Soldier.
thank you for having me as well.
Yeah. And now we go into number 6, the end game. And there you have it, a scalable, replicable liquidity engine powering Frax, as well as FPI and FrxETH, maybe soon to be FraxBTC. Working deterministically to uphold the 4 pillars, generate monetary premium, and capture value for DeFi in all economic environments. To quote DeFi Nale, Frax will offer a monetary premium over the full interest rate liquidity cycle. Frax offers the full vertical on-chain liquidity stack for investors. For high-rate environments, you have SFrax and FXBs, and for low-rate risk-on environments, you have FrxETH and SFrxETH. I remember this when Nolly dropped this message in the Frax Telegram, and everyone was like, "Whoa!" And from reading this is how I like got my all-weather stablecoin kind of like spiel about Frax. Can we go into what Nolly said here?
Sure. Yeah. So
go ahead.
So he basically talks about sort of. I think for people who aren't too familiar, most of the time the way investors like allocate capital is based on like sort of like based on interest rates in general. That's kind of the biggest driving factor for how people allocate the capital based on risk. And so in high interest rate environments, it just makes a lot more sense for people to basically look towards treasury yields as means of getting sort of a more stable income. And Frax has products in place to facilitate that, right? And when interest rates eventually taper off and go lower in the next year, 2 years, investors will then look to something like, say, FrxETH and FrxETH as a way of like kind of generating sort of returns for themselves. And so in this sense, Frax basically just covers sort of the full spectrum of like the yield curve. And obviously, investors don't just do one or the other. They crunch some numbers and they figure out what works best for them, given their risk appetite, and they can basically handle all these investments without leaving the Frax ecosystem. And I think that's quite powerful. I don't think any other DeFi protocol has this kind of versatility as of yet. I think it's just Frax. Yeah.
The versatile all-weather stablecoin for all conditions, rain or shine, winter or summer. Frax is there, and Frax will become the center of gravity for DeFi during the next bull run, drawing in retail, DAOs, institutions by issuing money, generating yield, structuring loans, and incubating other financial entities. We are witnessing the ascent of an ecosystem of composable assets and sub-protocols capable of capturing trillions of dollars of liquidity held in ultrasound, stable, and facilitated by precise, progressive engineering, a intergalactic force of nature, a black hole. Entering the black hole's orbit creates friction, and with friction, galaxies are born. If you made it this far, my heartfelt thanks to you. I spent a considerable amount of time on this piece. If you like my work, I would appreciate your support with a like. And, I'm just reading it.
You're good there, Dave.
I gotta give it the like and retweet, guys. I gotta give it. Like now, like people know that we did it during the interview.
Yeah.
But yeah, bravo. Let's give it a round of applause.
Yeah, I think it was super eloquent. I love your writing, how in the beginning you obviously brought us full circle at the end. You know, you hooked us in and then you gave us a really nice closure piece. I loved seeing that. I think more people should write like that. I wish more threaders wrote the way you did, because it was...
We need more poetry and less shillatry.
Yes, more poetry.
Yeah. But yeah, this took quite some time. Like, I have to say that, like, because it was originally a lot longer than it currently was, because I was going to kind of
you can do all the sub protocols and all that stuff.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And then I was like, I think that would be like a very, very long thread. Because I do think that Frax has a lot of other key pieces that are in place that most people don't really, at least it's kind of not on people's minds at the moment. Like, for example, I think the custom term sheets will be quite powerful, especially if you think of Frax as like a central bank, and being able to issue and denominate debt in Frax to like whitelisted protocols, to institutions, and they'll be quite powerful as well. I also believe that like in the future, once you can pair Frax with long tail assets, like the same way you do with like USDT and USDC, Frax will also have it. So I see like the ideal future for Frax, and I do think that the team is taking very conscious steps to making it happen. And so I'm quite excited, just in general, as an FrxETH holder and also as someone who's in DeFi, because I do think that they're kind of like jack of all trades in the situation, but they're actually doing it like very, very well. And I don't think any other team has come close to the breadth and depth of what they've done.
Yeah, you did an excellent job of picking what to include in your thread and what to remove from your thread. That's a really hard art. Like, you know, writing's just one thing, but being able to like cut out which may be like good, but it's like unnecessary in order to create something that's a full, like the narrative that you want to get across to your reader. Like, you did that, you know, an excellent job of that. I just want to reiterate that.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And so what is your favorite Frax product that's coming out, like coming next for release? So S-Frax was just released, Frax bonds are on the way. There's also FrxETH v2, there's BAMM, and there's FraxChain. Like, have you looked into any of those at all? Like, which one are you excited for?
I am quite excited for Frax bonds.
The yield curve on chain.
Yeah, yield curve on chain, but also because I personally think like yield trading and like interest rate trading will be I won't say it's like a big narrative, but I do think there'll be a really big appetite for that kind of behavior, just because now you actually have sort of on-chain yield products that weren't available before. And I do think that there's a few protocols that are like kind of doing this. I believe like something like Hourglass or like Timeless, something like that. I think it's Hourglass. Yeah, they're doing something along those lines. And
shout out Shirley, friend of the show.
Yeah. And there's obviously also like Pendle that's doing yield trading as well. And so I think it will be quite interesting to see like Frax bonds themselves. The product itself is something that's quite straightforward, but I think what it enables, like once you bring that asset class entirely on chain, and you can do so in a decentralized way without KYC, without sort of all the bureaucratic things you'd have to go through typically. I think what happens after that is like something I'm quite excited about.
Yeah, like it's not even out yet, and look at all these projects that are like building like on top or like similarly on top of it. I'm personally really excited for BAMM. Have you looked into BAMM at all?
So I first actually heard about BAMM on Flywheel, but I'm not sure if my understanding of, I'm not sure if like the nature of BAMM itself has changed, because when I first looked into it on Flywheel, I believe it had something to do with like long tail assets and Frax, right?
Yeah.
Basically, the way I understood it was similar to infinity pools, where you can basically kind of pair Frax with a long tail asset and do it in a way where it's like something like leverage without liquidation, something like that. But I don't think my understanding was right.
It's along those lines. I got a nice refresher from the man himself a few weeks ago. So I'll do my best explanation. So do you remember like when Bento Box was going to be a thing, or like on Sushi when they were trying to do like in like Uniswap V2, like you have a lot of unused liquidity, and it's just like, what are we going to do with that liquidity? And Bento Box was like, oh, we're going to put it in like cost, we're going to do this and that, but never really turned into anything. Basically what BAMM is doing something with that unused liquidity. The key with BAMM that like is the thing to get across. BAMM as a lending primitive cannot accrue bad debt. It can never accrue bad debt, and that's why long tail assets could be used in BAMM. You can do it with like ETH, you can do it with like any asset, but specifically that. So how BAMM works is, let's say you can like put like an ETH down in as like collateral, and you can take out like, let's say like 390 Frax at like 25% FTV. When the price of ETH goes down and like more ETH fills the pool because the prices of ETH is going down and you're nearing liquidation levels or like at liquidation, but since all the information is in the pool itself, like it will automatically like liquidate you first before like any other like trades are made from anything from the outside. So BAMM has no oracles, it's oracleless, and it cannot accrue bad debt. And conversely, like if it's going like the other way around, it will like, buy up ETH, to like recollateralize. So the team is really excited about this. This is going to be launching on Frax Chain when Frax Chain launches, and I think like it has the potential to be like I think it'll like really set the tone for Frax Chain in the same way that Frentech set the tone for Base.
So in a way, it's kind of like Llama from Curve USD.
Yes, it is. Yes,
and so the value, and so the LP position itself basically. Like the asset composition of the LP changes based on like
exactly. It's exactly like Llama.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but I would say Llama is a bit more capital efficient because it can accrue like bad debt. But like BAMM was designed so it won't accrue any bad debt, and that's why when you see people in the chat saying like BAMM's going to get us to like like it's going to raise the CR to 100%, like that's why, because it can't accrue like bad debt.
Nice.
Yeah, so that is the BAMM. And then of course Frax Chain coming out. That's all exciting stuff. Kit, what are you excited for coming up?
So I tried to move some things around like last night when ETH was at, when Gwei was at like 230 Gwei for the fast. Yeah. And then base Gwei was like 150. And I was trying to move some of my Frax stuff around. I was like, I just want to be able to move it and not pay like $500 for a withdrawal or a deposit or something. Like, I can't wait for that. I can't wait for us to have our own isolated. I can't wait to manage my finance in like a more controlled, executed environment. Right. I see Frax as like the financial district on Ethereum. Once Frax Chain kind of comes on and it lives within that district, and nothing outside is going to affect us, and we can still use our finances when things are going ballistic everywhere else. I think that is what I'm excited for.
Yeah. And I'm going to have one more question before we close this interview. So Winter Soldier, what is your ultimate bull case for Frax? We want to hear like the world domination scenario of Frax, and inversely, what are like some risk and precautions and everything like that should be thought of and taken into account along that way to world domination?
I think the world domination case for Frax, I think is quite similar to like what Ken mentioned. It's just everything you do is like Frax related. So if you want LSTs,
all I see is Frax.
Yeah. If you want to trade long tail assets, if you want access to treasury yields, all of this, or if you want access to like an inflation like stablecoin, for example, right? You basically do it through Frax. And I think this more has to do with just like Frax's positioning as like supposedly the central bank of DeFi, where if you're a retail user, you you trade/invest in Frax denominated currency. If you're a DAO or an institution, you can approach Frax for loans. You can use basically term sheets to structure something, and then maybe those term sheets can be used to as some sort of collateral for some other debt as well in the future, right? Kind of like the way I see it is kind of like mortgages almost, where you, or like what are those called? Oh, like mortgage-backed securities, kind of, where like you basically buying or like purchasing sort of Frax denominated debt from these other DAOs who are looking for liquidity, something like that, right? Like Frax could facilitate that in the future. And so yeah, I think it's basically what I kind of outlined in the thread, where basically you hold Frax because it's stable, but it also gives you access to just so many things on chain that it almost becomes like a no-brainer to hold it. Like it's kind of like, oh, I can have USDT and I can have it on my wallet. I think that's fine and dandy, but if I hold Frax, I can do so much more with it. And it almost kind of, it's a very compelling, you have a lot of compelling reasons to basically diversify your stablecoin holdings, because swapping of USDT to Frax also has a cost, right? And so I think Frax is taking very, very conscious steps to making sure that like there's a high demand for their stablecoins. And I think sort of the 4 pillars that I mentioned in the thread, I think those are very much like real and they're running. But then I think when it gets to a point where, you know, BAMM is a thing, when FrxETH v2 is a thing, I think we'll actually, and then Frax has its own app chain. I think we'll actually see, oh, by the way, like we have a very fully functioning, self-sustaining ecosystem on ETH, and it's quite inclusive as well, so anyone can just show up and join. It doesn't have any mechanisms that kind of precludes latecomers or makes the rewards disproportionately favor like early new joiners, even though, you know, there is some sort of benefits to being early. So yeah, I think that's kind of like in my head, like everything is in Frax, everything you use is like Frax. It's kind of like I kind of say one of like Apple, where if you use an Apple product, you're just kind of gradually sucked into the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. If you have an iPhone, you're gonna like you probably get Apple Music,
Mac,
pods, yeah. You get a Mac, and that's where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna get a TV as well, and then you just kind of get, and then by the time you look, we're like, oh crap, I actually have, you know, a lot of Apple products. But then you're quite happy because the quality of what you use is actually quite high, and it, you know, gets you places that you want and helps you do things you want to do. So yeah. On the flip side, for things to look out for, I still think sort of like censorship and like regulations are still a risk, just because no one has any idea how all this is going to work. And I do think that Frax's sort of status as a reserve stablecoin quite heavily depends on being able to on having RW like real world assets to back it, whether it's, you know, repos and other assets as well. I think it's possible for them to diversify to sort of non-cash assets in the future, but I think getting there would take a lot of research and time. But I am quite optimistic as well. So yeah, I think those are kind of the two main things.
And so, you know, Frax's utility ultimately, both in yield and then its use and also like products to be created in the future, will in and by itself increase its monetary premium. And you'll just want to hold Frax because, hey, like I really like that Apple comparison. That's the first time I heard that. I'm going to use that from now on. So it'll be like the Apple of currency. Actually, I have one more question, and then we can move on to the lightning round. Since I know you're based out in Hong Kong, what is the Frax community like in Hong Kong and Asia, and what could Frax do to expand its influence there?
Frax, I wouldn't say it's as big as like what it is in the US. Like, I know. Like I think, like I've heard of people from Frax who work in Asia, like Kevin and I think Andy. Like I've heard of them before.
Shout out Kevin and Andy.
Yeah, I've heard
also
of them
friends.
Before.
Also friends.
Yeah. Just from my colleagues at Hailstone. But I don't think it's as widespread as some of the other protocols that quite heavily sort of focus on community building. And And in some strange way, I would honestly say that a lot of those users would actually benefit from the products that Frax has to offer, as opposed to just buying the governance token of some DEX on some random chain. Like I think the use case for holding something from Frax it's just a lot stronger than like a random DEX token. In terms of how you can increase presence in Asia, I think I'm going to use the Apple analogy again because I think it's a really, really good way of like kind of quote unquote indoctrinating users into Frax. I really think it just starts with something simple. Like I think obviously right now it's possible that we have like that the next bull run has kind of somewhat started, and so there's going to be a lot more renewed interest into, hey, what can I do on chain with my funds, right? And I think right now rates are still kind of high. And telling someone, hey, you can actually earn U.S. Treasury yields through a specific protocol with like little to no smart contract risk, with a very good team, and with a very strong ecosystem of other products that you can potentially explore. I think that's a really good angle. And then the rest of it really boils down to just sort of, I guess, finding a few key community members in specific countries to kind of help you like champion Frax. I think that in my experience, has been quite a good model. I know that Maker has something similar where they have communities in Japan and China. They're quite strongly kind of advocating for Maker. I think Curve has something similar too with some of their Chinese-based community members. And so I think having those and using them as like a conduit for onboarding new users to Frax will be quite good.
Yeah. Even to that. This has been quite the episode. I didn't think I could get more bullish, but I am. Winter Soldier, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to start with the lightning questions now. Kit, and take it away.
We'll just keep it short, Winter. Just hit us with first thing that comes to your mind. What was your virgin crypto experience? When did you first touch the blockchain? And sex doesn't count.
Buying an NFT.
There's some alternative universe where Winter Soldier is like an NFT, like just like
influenza.
Don. Yeah, and NFT influenza, like shilling whitelist, like I can't. Summer Soldier. That's Summer Soldier.
That's Summer Soldier. New handle. All right. Second question. What is your favorite off-chain touch grass activity? Hobbies and interests.
I hike and trail run. Yeah, I think that's the best way. Touch grass. Look at the sky.
Natural to touch grass.
Don't check your phone. You feel your heart pumping in your head. I think that's makes you feel quite alive. At least for me, it does.
What would be some advice to your younger self?
I think just don't worry too much. There's always the next thing for you to do.
There's always the next thing.
Yeah.
And then if you weren't in finance, tech, or crypto, what would your career path be?
I would probably be DJing full time and producing music. I think that's because I'm a big raver. I used to go to quite a bit of raves in the US.
I still go to quite a bit of raves in the US.
I was actually just back this past May for EDC.
I was there too.
Yeah. So, I picked up DJing as a hobby in college, and I just kind of stuck with it.
Oh, me too. Well, I didn't pick up in college, but I picked it up right before COVID.
Yeah, so probably DJing.
What do you DJ? What's your genre of choice? Well, to DJ and to go to shows with.
It really depends. I've done it for a while, so I can pretty much mix most genres, top 40, hip hop, house, techno, like drum and bass, dubstep, future bass, basically all of it.
We got a man of all trades here.
Yeah. So.
What are your views on dubstep?
I think having listened to it since when I was a lot younger, I think it's outlived its popularity, I would say. Right now, I think.
I disagree.
Yeah, because like I went back to like an Excision set, and I was just like, oh, it's like I'm not as. It's something I haven't seen before, yeah. And I was just like this is good, but it's like, hey, like I'm just kind of listening to old songs that I used to listen to when I was young.
You gotta listen to EPROM. You gotta listen to G Jones. You gotta listen to all the new rhythm guys. But I'm getting like off topic. you gotta listen
Lightning
to Vulgar.
round, guys. Come on.
Yeah, sorry. All right. We're wrapping up. We're wrapping up. Okay. Who would you recommend as a guest of the show?
Who you recommend as a guest of the show? I spoke to, I think Emperor Osmo. I think he's quite knowledgeable.
Osmo. Okay.
Emperor Osmo. My flow's like Osmo on Twitter. I think he's very knowledgeable. I spoke with him for maybe like half an hour-ish 2 weeks ago, and from what I can gather, he's I really like the way he kind of thinks and like answers questions. Yeah.
Emperor Osmo. Got it. Flows like Osmo on Twitter. Nice. All right, wrapping up this legendary episode right on the eve of the bowl, we have Winter Soldier. It's finally spring, and Winter Soldier's coming out, and he's coming out with a bang. Winter Soldier, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Post game, guys.
Post game. We had some
Post-game.
time to reflect on this one because, not gonna lie, it was a lot to take in the best way possible. But that pod got me amped up. I enjoyed reading that. Winter Soldier is such a poet. He's like Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and he took the road less traveled and became not just any threader, but a poetic threader, a researcher.
Space researcher.
Yeah.
Black hole connoisseur.
Yeah. A scientist.
Yeah.
So first thing, I thought it was funny he got rugged like 20 to 30 times. In the first time.
In NFTs, nonetheless. Yes.
It's probably like the typical
story arc.
retail experience, you know?
Yeah, like the story arc of like, I'm just like, is it like after like the fifth time, 10th time, 15th time? But it's like, he was right. It's like, you're going to have like one of them hit that like makes all your money back and then some.
Yeah.
Worth it.
But it's great to see the time and effort that he put into these posts. I know that they're extremely well written. Before we talk about it, though, as Winter Soldier coming from the Marvel universe, what's your superheroes that you guys would be?
What would be my superhero?
Yeah, no, like who would you be as a superhero?
That's a good question.
I like Iron Man.
He's just super smart and super wealthy.
Wait.
I could achieve that, but
You know what I mean?
from Krypton.
Is Doctor Strangelove the time travel guy?
Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange.
Yeah, Doctor
Oh
Strange.
yeah, I'm Doctor Strange. I'm going back and forth in time.
I could see that.
I can see that.
How about you, Sam?
I'm mixed because, I think like being like, I think being something like a Spider-Man would be pretty cool. You can just like hang out, fly through the city, you're like a normal
Literally
person.
hang out.
Literally hanging
literally
around.
hang out. Yeah.
I would just like to be a wizard, to be honest. Just like chilling
I could see
on my
that.
like nook by the pond.
You're one buff ass wizard, though.
Yeah, I'll have my staff. I'll have my cape. I'll just be like, vibing, wandering through the forest, looking for herbs, whatnot.
And continuing on the Marvel route, I liked his analogy of Finres PBC being like the final stone in Thanos' glove.
I think that was my analogy.
Was it? No, I thought it was him that did it.
Oh, maybe it was him. Sorry.
Maybe it was somebody. But somebody
You
used
both
this
can be
analogy.
poets. It's okay.
I am a poet.
Somebody used this analogy that like Finres was like the final stone in the Thanos' glove, which I thought was pretty cool. I also liked how I mean, like, like all in all, it was really nice. It was a really nice interview. I think that he did a a great job in his research, and the way that you read through the tweets was really great as well too, Dave.
I had a lot of fun reading those tweets.
Yeah.
It made me quite animated.
Yeah. So it's, I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about like the whole, like curve convex side of things, about how it's like harder for new projects to get involved with curve. But, like with, I don't know. I don't particularly agree with that, because like, I think if you wanted to acquire CRV here or convex here, the prices are at where they were in like September of 2021. Like we're pretty much like all the way back. So if there was this demand for a project to get into the curve wars, like now's a great time to do it, because the prices are so depressed. You're not buying curve at like curve or convex at like $6 per CRV, or convex at, I don't know, what was it, like 40 or something.
No excuses.
No excuses. So like now is the time. Protocols out there have no excuses to get involved. And this is what we're seeing. I mean, introduction of Prisma will be getting involved with the curve wars, and like a bunch of other FFX protocol.
Mm-hmm.
You saw Reserve too. Like they were TWAPing and DCing into.
They bought their whole CRF.
Yeah, they bought their entire CVX bag. They didn't complain. They were just like, yeah, we have our strategy. We're gonna buy CVX and we're gonna vote for our stablecoins.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
I think what Winter Soldier may be alluding to is that like those who did it early has a massive head start. Like their initial CRV begot more CRV, which kind of like spirals them into this kind of behemoth, which is kind of what Frax did.
Yeah.
Right. But the good thing about Frax is though, like Frax is willing to share that. Right. As long as you pair it with FraxBP, and that's the meta pool kind of whole system. So
yeah. Yeah, I think Frax has done a good job of, we've been able to grow, but there's space for other protocols to come in. And I think that they understand that, is that like Frax can't be the only player in the curve ecosystem. There has to be other participants. You need the more diversified CRV holdings are, and the less whales that you have in the curve ecosystem, the stronger the system is, and the more robust the wards are going to be. So like if Frax owned 30% of all curve or something like that, it would be detrimental to the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of similar to LSTs, don't you think? Like, if somebody owns like too much, is it detrimental? Too much of the market share? Please please self-limit. Please, bro. Just self-limit, bro. Please.
Self-limit. I did like his analogy, how like Frax base pool is like rice, right? You just mix it with everything. Like it goes a little bit here, you mix it with you mix it with the Frax base pool. This new token over here, you just mix it with the Frax base pool. This token over here, let's put it with the Frax base pool. It's something you just like mix in with everything.
Oh, but he did say this one thing though about that. It's like when Frax is like fully collateralized by real world assets. Like, what if we just retire Frax base pool because we don't need USDC anymore, right? So why don't we just be that pair for the people? I thought that was so bullish. Like he was more bullish than I was, and I am. So I was like, it was so refreshing to hear. Like, please, like red pill me on Frax.
Yeah. It's always interesting hearing other perspectives from, people that are interested in the ecosystem, that are passionate, whether it was like Winter Soldier, DeFi Cheetah, Crypto Investor, their genuine interest and curiosity, that drives them to learn and then drives them to come with their own conclusions and their own ways of explaining things. It adds so much to the ecosystem. It creates this positive flywheel, pun intended, to keep everything spinning and to keep growing.
Yeah.
I
it's
like
great.
Great to red pilled.
Yeah, it's great to think of Frax as like the next Circle or the next Tether, and that we've built everything on chain first, and then can transition into being maybe there's something that the Finres sets up later on to create like a Frax USD or something.
So sick.
FrxUSD.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we definitely need the word USD in the name, like.
And And when that happens, you know where we'll be. You know where you'll find it first. To make sure you get it first, make sure you go hit that bell button right now. You subscribe. Do it right now. Don't forget. And then leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Love us, hate us, what we can improve on. We welcome all feedback. Make sure you give us a like, and make sure you follow us on all socials at Flywheel DeFi on Twitter, Telegram, and TikTok. I don't know. I just love saying TikTok like that. I just think it's funny. I'm sorry. Make sure you go to our website, subscribe, flywheeldefi.com. Go do that right now. And then you can follow yours truly on my Twitter at DeFiDave22.
Follow me at 0xcapital_K.
Oh yeah, and I'm at traders_insight.
And we'll see you next week with Dolomite.
Please send it.
Everything said on this episode is not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly for educational purposes and is not an investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice whatsoever. Please talk to your accountant and do your own research.